Welcome to the road to 1 million US dollars. Let's get right into the Bitcoin chart for today, starting on this 1 hour time frame for Bitcoin, because we have some critical price action today, as well as a new breakout pattern that I will be showing you later on in this video. First of all, in yesterday's video, we talked about potentially confirming a new uptrend for Bitcoin. We already had a low and a higher low coming in, so all we were looking for was a higher high to come in above this previous high for us to properly confirm that new uptrend. However, as you can see, we got horizontal highs in the Bitcoin price. Therefore, right now, Bitcoin is not confirmed in an uptrend yet. We need to see those higher highs come in after a higher low. And right now, that is not the case. We do have a critical level of support to be paying attention to, which we are currently trading right on top of, sitting at 104.9K. This is a critical level on the 1 hour as well as the 2 hour time frame. Here you can see that breakout pattern that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. This is what you call a symmetrical triangle pattern. This is basically when the Bitcoin price is just being squeezed by a descending line of resistance and an ascending line of support. Again, currently we are trading right on top of that level of support. In the case that we confirm a breakout here, guys, something to note about these symmetrical triangle patterns is that, one, they can be quite tricky with fake outs, for example, first breaking to the downside and then just reversing from there, or of course the opposite of that. So that is something to be very mindful of when you're looking at the symmetrical triangle patterns. Besides that, this is not a bullish bias or a bearish bias pattern. It can break out to both sides. For example, if we break out currently above 105.6K, it would set up this price target at 108.6K. However, if we now break out to the downside below that level of support at 104.9K that I mentioned earlier, then we do have a breakout price target of 102.3K in the Bitcoin price. Something else to take note of is the fact that we do have this CME gap to the downside as well, sitting at around 101.9K in the Bitcoin price. You can see that right here on the Bitcoin CME exchange. We have this CME gap just sitting here, and currently on the CME exchange, this is just in a downtrend on the daily time frame. So it wouldn't be completely crazy to see a wick down to this level, because in the case that you don't know, over 90% of CME gaps tend to get filled. Yes, I said 90%. That means that not all of them get filled, but most of them do end up getting filled. For example, if you look right here, we had a CME gap all the way in the beginning of March, and then we didn't end up filling it until the end of April here. So again, it can take quite a lot of time for a CME gap to get filled. That is just something to be mindful of. And like I said, some CME gaps never get filled. For example, this CME gap all the way down at about 53K. Hawkeye from the Discord community is still waiting on this CME gap. Now let's move on to this 4 hour time frame. We do still have a critical level of support sitting at around 103.1K. It is this 0.236 Fibonacci level. We have seen quite a lot of price action around this level here. So breaking down below that would be quite bearish. The next level of support below that is 101.4K on this 4 hour time frame. But the clearest picture is actually this 1 day time frame right now, because we had a bit of a move to the downside after we broke down from this rising wedge pattern. It hit this price target here at about 100K in the Bitcoin price. We reversed to the upside, and in fact, we broke this descending trend line. So this was actually starting to look pretty bullish for Bitcoin. However, as you saw in my recent videos, we had this sideways chop on the lower time frames and ended up breaking down from there, which led to us getting this big dip to the downside all the way down to 102.5K, roughly speaking. But like I said, this 1 day time frame right now is pretty clear, because this right now simply looks like a failed breakout of this descending trend line, potentially heading for new lows if something does not change very, very soon here. Right now, we are still trading inside a big level of support, setting from 107 all the way down to 105K in the Bitcoin price. This is, of course, on the daily time frame. If we start closing candles down below that, like, for example, the candle we have in about 3 hours or so, likely we are heading down to this next big level of support below, sitting from 103K all the way down to 101.5K. again in the Bitcoin price. Besides that, you can see on this RSI that this is currently just in a downtrend at the moment. So if we are really looking for some kind of bullish move to the upside, ideally you would see a break of the trend line in the price, as well as a break of the trend in the RSI momentum indicator. So this is something that I'm going to keep an eye on over the next couple days, potentially weeks. So as of right now, the 1 day time frame is looking slightly more bearish. However, we should also keep an eye on this symmetrical triangle pattern, because even if we end up doing something like this, then of course the 1 day time frame will also start to look very different. That's why I am personally keeping an eye on the lower time frames right now. Lastly, taking a quick look at the Bitcoin liquidation heat maps. First of all, on this 3 day time frame, right now we have liquidity to the upside and to the downside, which is quite typical in a weekend. Usually when we are chopping sideways like this, or simply when you are in a symmetrical triangle pattern like this, you will start to see liquidity pile up to the upside and to the downside. So this is all pretty normal stuff. Indicates that you're not familiar with this chart. Typically, the Bitcoin price gets attracted to where there is the most liquidity on this chart. So where there is the most yellow areas here. For example, if we're talking about liquidity to the downside on this 3 day time frame, that is sitting at around 104K and even as low as 103.2K. However, if we're talking about liquidity to the upside right now, that is sitting at 106 and even 107K. However, since we have liquidity on both sides, we should actually zoom out a bit more, because this might give us a clearer picture of what is actually going on. You see that upside and downside liquidity on this 2 week time frame as well, but there is another big level of liquidity sitting at around these previous all-time highs. And you can see this as well on the 1 year time frame here. All of that short-term liquidity that I showed you earlier, it is barely even visible on this 1 year time frame. Right now, there is actually a massive pocket of liquidity to the upside, again, around these previous all-time highs, where we have over $40 billion worth of short positions that would get liquidated if the Bitcoin price reaches that level. Now, to me, right now, as I'm seeing the charts, it would be pretty surprising to me if we do not end up punishing these short positions at some point. That, of course, remains to be seen. Potentially, if the Bitcoin price kind of keeps chopping sideways here, you can imagine that we have a descending trend line along the top of these highs and potentially some kind of level of support along these lows right here, forming a massive breakout pattern. And we could take a look at that at another time. But right now, if we're talking about liquidity on the 1 year time frame, most of the realistic liquidity is to the upside. Now, if we are going to be breaking massive levels of support, then we can start looking at liquidity to the downside at around 100K, potentially even 93K if it really gets that bad. But at the moment, it is not clear, because we are simply just chopping sideways, waiting for some kind of breakout to happen on the lower time frames, which will then waterfall into the higher time frames as well. So make sure you subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you do not miss any of these important update videos. But regardless, if you do end up subscribing or not, thank you for watching once again, and I will see you tomorrow in the next one.